I know I'm repeating myself when I say it's not a bad format, because I don't want people to misunderstand what I mean. Because like a lot of people are just saying they think it's a bad format because there's only a few viable decks. That's not the reason why I wanted to change. I specifically don't think that's the reason. Speaking of format changes, king of what's it called? Now I don't know the word. What's the word for? Is it transition? God damn it. Segue, that's the word. I want to do a little bit of a ban list discussion that I have already teasered last week / yesterday on my Twitter and my Discord. Before we do that, should we look at the OCG metagame? Because I think it's important. Just for context, because to be clear, I want to make a ban list discussion for after Photon Hypernova. That means next format, which is basically exactly where we are at in the OCG right now. The OCG is exactly at this point. Even though there are a couple of key differences, it's a little bit like looking into the future for the TCG. Of course, there are major changes. I'm looking at you, little Maxi, but the OCG is exactly in that spot. They are in after Photon Hypernova territory, and they have experience. I'm seeing the statistics on the screen already. I haven't looked at this beforehand. Look, this is the current OCG metagame breakdown. Mind you, after they have done the following things. They have already limited Agido for Ishizu a while ago. Agido and Keldo, I want to say. They have 2 Havnis. So far, so good. Solid hit. No, just 2 Havnis. Card's annoying, sure. They have 1 Perla Rhino. That card is very strong. That searches any tier name. That deserves to be on the ban list. Sure, that's limited. They have limited Rhino Heart. Okay, Rhino Heart is pretty strong. Rhino Heart is pretty good. To be fair, a couple people in the TCG, and I'm sure also in the OCG, have only been playing 2 anyways. So taking out 1, maybe not the biggest deal, but okay. They have limited Sharon, which that's a 3 of staple in every tier deck right now, like hands down. That's a big hit. On top of that, they have also banned Kid Kalos. They have banned the Kid Kalos, and the OCG doesn't have Garura yet. And now this is the statistics we are looking at. 21% Tearlament by a margin of 7%, still the most played deck. Now, I have announced this as a very big ban list discussion, and I believe that needs to be done. In order to not forget anything, I have asked you guys as well to participate on my Twitter yesterday and also my Discord server, which if you want to take part in like future videos like this, join the Discord or follow me on Twitter. The links are in the description down below. This is also going to be a YouTube video, so you know, hello YouTube, how are you doing? So what we're going to do today, we are going to discuss the next Yu-Gi-Oh ban list, because I think we are getting a little bit closer to it. However, I don't believe that this ban list is going to hit until Photon Hypernova. Photon Hypernova is relatively soon, pretty much exactly a month from now. I don't think we're going to get a ban list previously to that. Sadly, I would prefer it, but we probably won't. So we're probably going to have to wait a little bit longer. So that is the premise. We will be looking at or considering the format after Photon Hypernova. It's not changing too much. It's basically just we're gonna take Kashtira into consideration as well. And basically what happened is I asked you guys on Twitter and on Discord to throw any card at me that you wanted me to discuss, whether it should land on the ban list or not. So we've put it all in one giant tier list maker, and we're gonna go through it. Now, this might seem like it's gonna be a long discussion, because it will be a long discussion, because I think we need to have a long discussion. So why do I think that the next Yu-Gi-Oh ban list has to be a big one? It needs to be a big one, and I'll tell you why. The current format has 3 very, very strong decks in Tearlament, in Spright, and in Floowandereeze, with Tearlament being arguably a decent bit stronger than Spright and Floowandereeze, but I think most people would agree that if we hit Tearlaments, we should also be hitting Spright, and we should also be hitting Floowandereeze. So that's the first 3 things we're gonna have to cover. The reason why I think that's not enough is if these 3 decks go out of the picture a little bit, or just get weakened a little bit, there's a lot of decks that will come into the spotlight that have been very strong previously that have not been touched by a ban list yet. Like the only reason why some of these decks, mostly Branded and Sword Soul, are not being played right now, or not being played very much because they're being played a little bit, is because they've been power crept pretty much. So if we stop Tear, Spright, and Flunder in their tracks, we might have to cover some other problems, because I don't think anyone just wants to go back to the format we had before Power of the Elements. I personally didn't like it that much, but even if you were a fan of it, I think just going back to the same format with the same problem cards is a little bit weird. So I think, or at least I want to suggest a couple of changes that maybe prevent that, right? Just a couple of preemptive hits. But we're going to go through this one by one. We're going to see how we can maybe adjust the current decks a little bit for them to be a little bit fairer. And then we're also going to look at what else has to be done. We're just going to go through it all one by one. Note that not all of the cards here are going to land on the ban list. This is just basically the suggestions. So what is the best way to hit Tearlaments right now? I don't think it's Crime. I'm going to leave Crime untouched, just to be clear. Crime is not the one. I want to preface that I am going to try and keep this realistic. This is not supposed to be a completely biased list. We're going to do exactly what I want to happen, but also try and keep it realistic for something that might actually happen. And I think something that should and might actually happen is banning Kid Kalos. Now, I think it's weird for a card like Kid Kalos, or like for the Tearlament deck as a whole, to go from basically 3 to 0 immediately. I think is a little bit weird, champ, but they've kind of missed the mark on the last couple ban lists where they haven't touched Tearlament at all, right? This is not too soon at all. The archetype is 6 months old. The Tearlament archetype has been pretty much dominating the game for 6 months and has not received a single hit on the ban list. I think it's too late for a freaking small hit like Pearl Rhino to 1, call it a day. That would have been a fine adjustment like 3 months ago. You know, nerf it a little bit. I think we're past that point. We are past the point where freaking Tearlament is fine with a small hit. Don't say Curious and Snow or Herald of the Orange Light are Tearlament hits, because they're not. The Tearlament engine is totally fine without. You can pair them with other good cards, and the past has shown this. Tearlament was good before Snow. Tearlament was good after Snow. Tearlament was good before Herald. Tearlament was good after Herald. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna suggest Kid Kalos to be banned, and I don't think that's enough even. Because we've looked at the OCG metagame. I've shown you this freaking graph. They've not only banned Kid Kalos, but also done a lot more than that. And I think we need to do a lot more than that as well. So I want to ask you right now, what do you think should happen with these other cards? I'm going to leave Scream untouched, because while it's a really good card, I don't think that's the one. I think we can all agree that Pearl Rhino is too strong. I don't personally think that Pearl Rhino is ban worthy. I don't think they want to do that, because Pearl Rhino, quite frankly, this is once again me being realistic instead of doing what I want to do, because I do absolutely think that Pearl Rhino is strong enough to technically be banned, but being realistic, the card has not been reprinted. Pretty much that is the expensive Tearlament card. I don't think their goal is to completely destroy Tearlament, so I think we're gonna see Pearl Rhino be limited, and I can live with that. I think it's weird for a card like this to be limited because it's an unsearchable one of, but I think that's the most realistic approach. Now, there are two possible outcomes here, and that is that I can definitely imagine them doing this to the Tearlament archetype and calling it a day. Keeping in mind, with also some Ishizu changes. The Ishizu engine has to be hit, but just for the Tearlament cards, I could see this being it. I'm not sure if that's smart, but if they manage to hit the Ishizu cards properly, this might be okay. Do you agree or not? Because what I'm trying to get at is the reason that Tearlaments is still strong in the OCG, which this is a list for reference, is the reason that this deck is still strong the Tearlament portion or the Ishizu portion? That's basically what I'm trying to figure out, because without the Mill 5 here, they still have 4 copies of. I'm not sure how good this deck is. So if they manage to hit the Ishizu stuff properly, maybe this is fine. However, if I had to give them another hit, which this might happen, this might not happen, I think it's already been shown having this semi-limiting or limiting like they did in the OCG is I think pointless. I think the best one out of the names is Merly. I've heard a ton of people suggest that they ban Merly because of the incredible synergy with Spright Sprint and Spright Elf, right? Making the Tearlament deck so synergistic with Spright Elf and Sprint is crazy. And that's why I think out of the Tearlament names, Rhinoheart, Sharon, Havness, Merly, the one that would be the smartest to hit is definitely Merly. I don't agree with hitting Sharon because all that does is really hit away one of the starter cards, which I'm not a fan of, just pure consistency hits like that. Same with Havness. Like, Havness is in itself, it's annoying to play against because it's a hand trap, but I don't think hand traps are the most unfair thing about Tear. I think hitting Merly would be reasonable. For now, I don't know how realistic it is though. I guess let's cover the Ishizu cards first and then maybe reconsider the Tearlament names, because for me, and I'm not gonna change my opinion, you can say whatever you want, but in my opinion, these all belong here, and you cannot change my mind on that. These are literally Dragon Rulers of 2022, and they should do the same thing. They can even ban them if they want to. I don't think that's gonna happen. But doing some half-ass stuff like they did in the OCG, where they only limited 2 of them, so you can still play 8 copies of them. To be clear, just for reference, they limited Agido in the OCG, and they limited Keldo. So they limited 1 Shuffler and 1 Mill 5 guy, which means you can still play 4 Shufflers and 4 Mill 5s. Which is freaking weird. That's still so many. People even only use 1 Agido most of the time, right? They have to do more than just limiting 2 of them. They have to limit all of them. And they are still going to be good cards at 1 each. Some decks are still going to play 1 Keldo, 1 Mudora. Decks that use the graveyard a lot, decks that discard, they are still super strong interruptions, but you just don't have them every single time. I'm gonna leave all these Ishizu cards at 1, and honestly, this might be copium, but I do not think that this is wishful thinking. Anyone who understands this game to like a deeper level, which I hope the people responsible for the ban list do, has to understand that if they don't limit all of these cards, they are always going to significantly change the way the game is played. Just limiting Agido is pretty much like limiting Tidal in 2013 and nothing else. You would still play full power Dragon Ruler, but just deal with having 1 Tidal. It doesn't make a difference. You have to hit the entire package hard. You can't hit 1 of them or 2 of them. Even 3 is weird if you can still play 6 copies. So all of them limited. And now we return to the Tearlaments. We will talk about Instant Fusion later separately, but imagine ban Kit Kalos, limit Pearl Rhino, limit all of the Ishizus. Chat, do we need more Tearlament hits? And also, do we expect more hits than that? I think a good way to put it is we might need more than that, but we're probably not going to get it. Can we agree on that? Because I don't want to make a ban list that's like super unrealistic. I think like a strong hit to the Ishizu cards and then a couple decent hits to the Tear engine, like this one on the screen right here, is pretty much about as good as we can expect. Like, I'm gonna say it this way. If we get ban Kit Kalos and limit these 5 cards on the screen right now, I'm going to be happy with it. Even though I think Tear is still going to be playable, I would still be happy with that outcome, right? Because I think it could be worse. I hope we can agree on that. I think under this premise, I would be fine with keeping Tear in the format as a much weaker version. And then Spright. Spright is a weird one for me. I mean, I'm a little bit biased. I love Spright personally. It's one of my favorite archetypes in recent years. I think it should be hit for sure. Like, I can't deny that. The archetype is very strong. The archetype is super powerful, especially after they hit Tearlament very strong, which I expect them to do. They need to do something about Spright. In the OCG, once again, looking over there, they have done 2 things. They have limited starter and they have limited jet, which I am not opposed to these changes. I think those are changes that make sense. I've said this multiple times before. I'm not the biggest fan of consistency hits, right? I think the goal should usually be to make a deck weaker in what it can do instead of just making it inconsistent so it can still sometimes be unfair, but not always, because it's sometimes bricks now. That's why I'm not the biggest fan of consistency hits like that. But in the particular case of Spright, especially Spright Starter is a card that, because Spright has like, they have such low attack values, and they are kind of a grindy deck, it very often comes up where you need the next copy of Jet or the next copy of Starter for follow-up, right? And so like, limiting Starter is a good change to Spright because it really limits your follow-up a little bit, right? It's not only for consistency, it's also a hit for follow-up, because Spright almost always sets up a board turn 1 with the help of Starter, and then really wants another Starter on the following turn. And by limiting Starter, you take away that follow-up, because Spright, as of now, doesn't have a way to recycle Starter from the graveyard. So that is, in my opinion, cool. I would not touch Blue and Jet. Because at that point, you're really hurting consistency maybe a little bit too much. I would rather look towards the Spright extra deck monsters. I think a limitation to Spright starter and then some hit to the Spright extra deck would be a good approach. Now, my problem here is... basically, I don't really want to touch Gigantic Spright because I think we can all agree that out of these 3 monsters, Gigantic Spright is by far the fairest one, right? That's the one that has the restriction. No one in the world can explain to me why Sprint and Elf don't have the restriction as well. They should have that. They should absolutely have the restriction, but Gigantic is the one that does, and that makes him the one that's fine, in my opinion. Now, Sprint and Elf are the more problematic ones. The problem is, for a Sprint change to matter, you have to ban it. And for an Elf change to matter, you have to at least limit it. The problem with these changes individually are that I don't know if Spright Sprint is ready yet to be banned, if that makes sense. Like, I really don't know. It feels a little harsh. It's a very strong card, but like, I don't know. I'm not convinced that this card will be banned. Maybe eventually, but not right now. And I'm kind of feeling the same towards Elf. Elf is an insane card that has uses in a lot of different decks, not just Spright. And the problem is if you limit Elf, it basically only hits Spright and not the decks that just splash Elf, right? There's a lot of decks that splash Elf that are not Spright decks. And the only deck that uses more than one Elf is Spright. But maybe that's fine. Maybe if you just want to hit the Spright grind game, right, by hitting starter and Elf, and now the Spright deck with 1 starter and 1 Elf is still consistent. It can still pull off a strong turn 1, but the grind game suffers. As a Spright player, I don't think the deck is dead with these 2 hits, but it does take a significant hit. I guess let me know in chat if you think this is enough for now. Keeping in mind that, of course, future ban lists might change it further, right? But would we be down to try this for now with these 2 changes? I think it seems appropriate looking at what we also said about Tearlaments, right? I do agree that Elf is a ban-worthy card, but I'm going to try and keep it realistic. I don't think they want to completely murder Spright and Tear to the point where it's literally, without a doubt, completely unplayable. I don't think that's what they want to do, because keep in mind, this is the first time that they are actually touching Tear and Spright. I hope at least, major copium alert. Like, I hope they're gonna touch Tear and Spright on the next ban list. Please, please. None of these cards have yet been reprinted. None of these archetypes have even had the slightest hit yet. I'm going to try and keep it realistic and say they're going to make some changes to them, but they're not going to kill them completely. And I think 1 Elf, 1 starter is a good adjustment. Now, Floowandereeze. We are not going to discuss this. This one stays. I have seen Floowandereeze in Master Duel after statue, and let me tell you, after the statue ban, I should say, it is so much more enjoyable to both play Floowandereeze and play against Floowandereeze in Master Duel once freaking statue has been banned. It is still fine to play, actually. It is not dead in Master Duel. It is actually pretty much fine, but it's just not as bad of a deck anymore. And I mean, I don't know what Empen is doing here. You could argue map could be like limited or semi-limited, although I'm not sure if that's necessary with the statue hit. Maybe it would be warranted. Chat, who would hit map even when we're banning statue? Please keep in mind, not just because you hate Floowandereeze, but because you you actually think it's necessary. Okay, I think we're split on this. I personally think it could be okay. But just to find the perfect balance, because all the people that say Floowandereeze ban the map and the people that say map is fine, I'm going to throw it in semi-limit. I think that's what it is at in Master Duel, and that feels fine. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm just going to put it somewhere in the middle. Featherstorm is basically a Floowandereeze card. If this was a wish list, this card would go here real quick. This card is absolutely stupid, but because this is at least somewhat realistic, I'm going to tell you guys right now, nothing is happening to Featherstorm, unfortunately. I don't like the fact that that's what it is, but look, there are so many cards that are similar to Featherstorm, like Sanctum, Scythe, D-Barrier, like Anti-Spell, cards that so many more people are complaining about than about Featherstorm. None of them have been touched, and Featherstorm is not their priority. It's not gonna happen, unfortunately. I don't think. I'd be very presently surprised if it does, but I don't think it will. And that is pretty much what I would do right now for the top 3 decks. I don't think Tear is dead after this. I don't think Spright is dead after this. I don't think Floowandereeze is dead after this, but I think they are all way more manageable. And that's, at the end of the day, I think what a ban list like should look like right now, right? Because none of these 3 decks have really been hit so far. There's nothing for Floowandereeze, nothing for Tear, nothing for Spright on the ban list, and it feels a little over the top to go from like 100% to 0% in one ban list, which is why this feels reasonable. Now, I said earlier, I expect this ban list to be after Photon Hypernova, and that means another big competitor enters the fray, and that is Kashtira. Now, once again, I don't know exactly how realistic this is. Once again, I'm going off of the OCG here a little bit, which they have hit the Kashtira archetype relatively fast. I think the field spell, this one, Primal Planet Paraisos, has like been released for a month and then it's already been limited, right? So it's definitely not completely unrealistic that Kashtira receives a hit after like a couple weeks, which, you know, I expect this ban list to be a couple weeks after YCS Lyon, for example, which means that we have a couple of events with Kashtira. And I think that's why there are going to be some changes for Kashtira on this next ban list. That being said, I don't think it's going to be this card, because this card is probably going to be a freaking secret rare. I mean, if I had to guess, they're probably not going to hit that a couple weeks after the release. Now, what they could absolutely hit, in my opinion, is Fenrir and Unicorn, because those cards have been out for a while. Now, okay, hear me out. Hear me out. I'm going to put these cards in these 2 categories. Hear me out. This might be wishful thinking because the archetype is very, very new. I don't know exactly how old the ban list is going to be. Take these 2 with a grain of salt, because I'm not very convinced that they actually happen, but this is basically what I would do, is I would limit Unicorn and semi-limit Fenrir. I've said it before, one core thing about Fenrir that I really enjoy is that it can be splashed into different decks to out like Floodgates, for example, or to break boards. I've talked about this in the past, how much I enjoy a card like this being splashable in a lot of decks. You can even play it in the main deck for outs to Floodgates, because it's good going first and second. And this is specifically why I would not like to see Fenrir limited, but rather semi-limited, because the fact that Fenrir can search itself is a pretty big deal, right? It's one of the few cards that I think should reasonably be semi-limited, like Malicious, because it's like, there's a good point to have Fenrir at semi-limit, and that is that you'll open it less often, but if you limit it, it basically loses a very essential part of its effect for all the decks that splash it, right? And so I think that's why it's perfect for semi-limitation. I'm putting Unicorn in limited because the OCG did that, so I kind of have hope that the TCG follows suit, even though I don't know how realistic that is. And that concludes the so-called meta decks for this discussion, right? That covers Tear, that covers Ishizu, that covers Spright, that covers Floowandereeze, and that covers Kashtira to a decent amount. I think all of those decks are still viable after a ban list like this, but they are all like a little bit worse. And that's basically what I wanted to achieve with this. Now we're going to talk about a couple of other cards. First up here, literally every single popular Floodgate has been named in the nominations. And I'm going to say right off the bat, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Floodgates today. I might make a separate discussion about Floodgates once again to end this freaking debate once and for all. Half of the community wants all of these banned. The other half of the community wants all of the Floodgates to have a special rule to where you can play 6 of each. I'm not going to bother taking one of the sides here. I'm just going to try and predict a realistic take, because clearly Konami wants Floodgates to be in the game. I don't think they're doing shit to Fissure. I don't think they're doing shit to Macro. Both of those cards came back to 3 and didn't do that much. Like, Fissure sees some play, but look, it's not going to happen. Skill Drain, there have been plenty of formats where they could have touched Skill Drain. They didn't do it. Right now, Skill Drain didn't do that much. It's not going to happen. Anti-Spell, look, if they did not hit Anti-Spell after this year's national format, they're not going to hit it right now, because right now no one's playing it. Maybe they think that's that means it's fair. I don't know what the hell they're thinking with that, but like this card should have been hit maybe at the national season, but right now they're not gonna do it. Gozen is not gonna happen. Not many people are playing Gozen right now. There can be only one is also not a huge deal right now. It's not gonna happen. The only card I could realistically see being hit is Rivalry, because that's like the most relevant one right now out of all these. However, I also don't think it's gonna happen right now. So this is mostly a prediction, not a wish list, but I don't think anything is happening to all of these Floodgates. I'm sorry to say it. I don't think it's happening. The same goes for D-Barrier. Moving from Floodgates to like just annoying cards that everyone complains about. D-Barrier was a huge deal 8 months ago. They didn't care 8 months ago. Why should they care now? No one's playing D-Barrier right now. I'm gonna make an exception for Scythe here. Because I think Scythe is in a very unique spot where basically after we hit Tear, Spright, Ishizu, Floowandereeze, and Kashtira, we have to think what happens after. And I think you have to remember that like Scythe was a huge deal and probably should be hit preemptively to prevent it from just returning to the game, right? We're going to talk about things like the Adventure Engine too, because of course, after you hit the top 3 or 4 decks, we basically go back to a world before Power of the Element, where basically out of 10 different decks in the meta, like 6 of them were just different flavors of Scythe lock. It is a good point in chat that Bystials do stop Scythe. However, I still think Scythe is just, because it's searchable, because Dagda exists, because Sanctum exists, it has just so much more potential to be problematic again rather than Floodgates, right? And also, I know the debate of their outs to the Floodgates is not something that a lot of people love to hear, but at least I can really side deck very well for like the decks that play a lot of back row, whereas against Scythe locks, it's a little bit harder. There's like Crow, Bell are weird ways to do it. There's like one called by, there's a very limited amount of stuff you can do for the Scythe log. So this might be copium, but Scythe is just inherently problematic and searchable and should definitely be banned, so I'm gonna leave it there. I only included Eradicator because of Labyrinth coming into the format as well, right? Like Labyrinth is definitely on the horizon with Photon Hypernova and might be a deck to look out for, and that deck can very easily search Eradicator, so I would really like a preemptive hit for Eradicator. However, here I'm gonna say it, I don't think it happens. I think we're gonna have to deal with it. If I was to make that decision, I would ban it, but I think it's gonna stay where it is. I don't know what to say about Super Poly, because I simply don't know whether they intended the interaction between Super Poly and Garura. They must have, right? It's such an obvious interaction between Super Poly and Garura. So for some reason, they wanted this. That's what throws me off about this. They wanted us to have that. Unless they missed the interaction between Super Poly and Garura, they wanted us to have Super Poly as a card that can fuse away any 2 monsters of the same type and attribute. And with that being said, since I'm trying to stay realistic, I could see this card getting semi-limited or limited, but my gut feeling tells me it's not going to get hit. For the sake of creating a good ban list, I'm still going to throw it into at least semi-limited category, because it's been semi-limited before, right? So it's definitely a card that they acknowledge could be on the ban list, but because they clearly intended for us to have Garura with it, I don't think they are going to limit or ban it. Unless they just missed that interaction. Unless they did that by mistake. Then maybe they're going to limit or ban it. But yeah. I think semi-limit is not the perfect place for the card to be. But probably the most realistic one. I don't think it's going to go from 3 to 1 immediately. Terraforming and set rotation. We've talked about these plenty of times before. So I'm just going to quickly say I think terraforming will stay where it is. And I think it's honestly, I guess it's fine. Like without Mystic Mine, it's okay. Of course, it's a powerful card like Rhoda and all the other searchers, but I just don't feel like they think that's ban worthy for a card. So like, I think terraforming is gonna stay where it is and I can live with it. There's like bigger issues than terraforming. Of course, it makes cards like Pearl Rhino even more powerful because you have an extra copy of it, but it's fine. It is worth considering that it is good with triple tactics tasking, yes, but that is an interaction with terraforming that I think they want, right? They want tasking to be a good card and have good one-off targets. So Set Rotation, on the other hand, is a card that now that Mystic Mine is banned, I'm actually super indifferent on Set Rotation. Like, the card is, yes, it searches your field spells, but it's so much less like generic and easy to use as terraforming, where like you have to play a second field spell that you want to give to your opponent. I'm actually indifferent about Set Rotation. I don't think the card should be banned. I feel like the card could even move up the list potentially, although I'm not happy with field spells being super searchable every single time. So probably best to stay limited for Set Rotation, but I'm very indifferent about this card. I don't think Set Rotation is problematic design in the way that terraforming is, simply because you have to run 2 different field spells, which you don't always want to. Where do we put Shifter? Because I'm gonna be honest, I think it'll stay at 3. I hate to break it to you, I think it'll stay at 3. I'm happy to be proven wrong by the people at Konami. I don't think it's gonna happen. They are not going to ban it. I promise you, Shifter is not gonna go from 3 to 0. I mean, look, having Shifter at 1 is very weird because it induces so much variance, right? Because like random unsearchable one-off that you need to have in your opening hand is super weird to be limited. Of course, I would rather play against 1 Shifter than 3, but I don't think it's going to be touched. So I'm going to leave it here, unfortunately. Now, I'm going to say it. If they ban Kid Kalos, Instant Fusion is not going anywhere. It should be banned. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it shouldn't be banned, but there's no way both of these things happen. Because look at the stuff that's coming. There's a B-Trooper fusion that is the perfect instant fusion target. So if they want to sell that one, instant fusion is going to stay. Instant fusion in the right deck is also one of the best targets for like the triple tactics card that can set normal spells from your deck. So for that, it's not going to go anywhere. It should be banned, but if they ban Kid Kalos, then I don't think it does get banned. If they, for some reason, which would be a disaster, if for some reason they think Kid Kalos can stay in the game, then they absolutely have to ban Instant Fusion. But I'm gonna be honest, if they ban Kid Kalos, I can live with Instant Fusion for now. It's a matter of a card that like it should probably be banned before it becomes a problem again, like it is right now. But since I've put Kid Kalos to banned, I'm just gonna leave it here. I'm sick of talking about Called by the Grave. I'm sick. The card should be banned, but look, this is the one format where it's actually not seeing that much play. Called by the 2 to help rogue decks. Brother, you don't understand how this works. Look, I hate to break it to you, but your rogue deck does not suck because Called by the Grave is limited. Your rogue deck sucks because it's worse than the other decks. Called by the 2 helps every deck out the same way. It does not help your rogue deck more than other decks. The card should be banned simply because hand traps, and that's gonna hurt some of you now, what I'm about to say, but hand traps are, for the most part, very healthy interaction on the first turn of the game. And stopping your opponent from interacting with you just so you can pull off some stupid-ass combo is weird, champ, and shouldn't be a thing, which is why I have very often hated cards like Crossout and Called by the Grave. However, right now is not the time to ban these cards. If they haven't banned Called by the Grave the entire year where it was so strong, they're not going to ban it now where no one really plays it because of the Ishizu cards. They're not going to do it right now. They're also not going to hit Crossout right now. No one plays Crossout. They should, yes. In my opinion, Called by should probably be here and Crossout should be somewhere, but not at 3. But right now, it seems odd to do that. Although I would still really like it, so I'm gonna cope a little bit and put it here. Maybe they get their shit together and finally ban Called by the Grave. Then I can live with Crossout, but like get rid of that. That would be fine. And then Talents has been mentioned. I am gonna leave Talents unlimited. It's a really strong card. I don't think Talents should be on the ban list though. Pot of Desires is currently semi-limited, and some people wanted it to go back to 3. I personally think it feels okay at 2. It's weird because I've always been saying that I don't think many cards should be semi-limited because like the card is either okay or it's not okay. But it's just with Pot of Desires at 2, I've learned that I just kind of don't care about it being at 2 or at 3, if you know what I mean. Like it's to the point where I can still play it if I really want to. And when I play against someone that's using Pot of Desires, it's like At least they don't draw it as often as if they were to run 3. So I can live with it. And I think kind of the same applies to Pot of Prosperity. I personally am of the opinion that Pot of Prosperity should not be at 3, simply because of how consistent it makes certain cards. I think that's a little bit problematic. Like, Prosp is a very cool card because I love consistency. I personally, I don't know about you, but I love not bricking. That's kind of like my thing. But I do acknowledge that there's a lot of cards that are like really, really impactful in certain situations, and being able to pick one card out of your next 6 cards is insane for consistency. I don't think Pot of Prosperity is so insane that it needs to be banned or something, because the drawback is significant, right? Both the drawback where you cannot draw and the drawback where you have to get rid of a significant portion of your extra deck are both very, very big drawbacks. I do think overall the card is still better than Pot of Desires though, and should therefore not be at 3 while Desires is at 2. So if we were fine with Pot of Desires at 2, then we should have Pot of Prosperity at least semi-limited. And I think I could settle with that. Like, it's a change where I'm not upset about it and I wouldn't hate it. And that brings us to another portion, and that is generic extra deck monsters. There are a bunch of extra deck monsters here, which I'm gonna be honest, I don't know why someone nominated Toad to be banned. I'm mad at you personally. Like, you know, fight me here on the spot. I don't know what you want. We're leaving Toad unlimited. Always. Do not suggest Toad again. It's, once again, it's putting me in a tough spot here, because I think there is a good point to be made for all of these cards to be banned, unironically. Winda being a floodgate should probably be banned, but I'm gonna keep it realistic here. That's not gonna happen right now. No one is Winda locking you. Like, I don't remember the last time I was Winda locked. It's not happening this format. They're not gonna do it. They're not gonna ban Winda right now. They've let it stay unlimited in formats where it maybe was warranted, but right now is not the time. Right now could be the time for these next 5 though. But Guska ain't going nowhere. I hate to break it to you, not happening. Garura not going anywhere, because whatever people are doing with Garura, I think is intended is the word I was looking for. I think they intended us to have Garura somehow. Like, they want it to be here. It's here. Enjoy your Garura, because it's here to stay, I think. And to be fair, besides Super Poly and Tearlaments, I actually don't mind Garura that much. It's mostly broken because the cards that make it are broken, right? Tearlaments making this for free is kind of busted, and Super Poly being such a sick combination with this card requiring the same attribute and same type is also kind of busted, but it's mostly because Super Poly and Tearlaments are problematic. I feel like Garura, if anything, is like the good guy out of these. The only reason I think people are saying Garura was a mistake is because of Tear and because of Super Poly. Like, if I'm looking at cards like Ultimate Slayer, Dogmatica Punishment, and whatever, this card is a perfectly fine target for these cards. I actually enjoy being able to use it with those. I think it becomes truly broken if you look at it in the context of Super Poly and Tears, which I don't think that warrants a ban on Garura. Beatrice, I think, could be banned eventually. I don't think now is the time, because even though Tearlament uses it to a decent amount and decent success, it really doesn't feel like the most problematic card in Tearlaments. It's very strong, but I don't think that's the one I would touch right now. It is, oh, you're right, it is already limited. I don't think they're going to move it up, but for what it's worth, I don't think there's a difference between it being limited and unlimited, to be fair. Like, the only deck that wants more than one Beatrice is BA. So actually, yeah, if you don't want to ban Beatrice, you should have it at 3. Because BA is the only deck that plays multiples, and that deck definitely needs some help. So I think for it to be limited is actually stupid. Because that means it's still splashable in every combo deck, which would always only use one. The only deck that suffers is BA, right? So you either have to ban it or you let it unlimited, I think, is my take. And now I'm going to get to the two that I really want to talk about, because I haven't touched any of the other ones. I think these two, and yes, I'm including Barone in this, I think both of these cards are bannable. I think Barone pretty much changed the game completely in the way it's played since its release. Whenever I'm looking at a new level 10 Synchro, I think to myself, yeah, this is pretty good, but it's not better than Barone. And I think that's not going to change. I think it's a similar effect that Chaos Ruler had, where whenever you had a situation where your deck could make a level 8 Synchro, you would always say, well, yeah, this level 8 Synchro is pretty good, but I'm just gonna make Chaos Ruler instead. That's basically the same that Barone does, but with level 10s. However, that being said, this card's not going anywhere right now. This card is being reprinted soon, and until then, it's not happening. I just wanted to say, I think this card should be banned, and I think there is a realistic possibility that it will be eventually, just not right now. I do think we are getting a lot of strong level 10 synchros recently and also in the near future, which would make it so that, like, at some point banning Barone would actually help them sell those new synchros, right? Because if they release level 10 synchro after level 10 synchro and we don't play any of them because Barone is always better, eventually they might want to ban Barone so that they can sell new level 10 synchros. Because right now, bro, you can release whatever level 10 synchro you want, 99% of the time, it's not gonna be better than Barone. And for the love of God, do not make a level 10 synchro that's better than Barone, because I'm afraid of that world. So that's my take on that. I think that card eventually might be banned. Dweller, I'm coping. I'm leaving it there. I'm leaving it there. I've talked about all of these other cards where I said, like, yeah, this card should be banned, but they're not gonna do it now because no one's playing it. Like D-Barrier, Rivalry, Winda. I said it about all those cards. Dweller is the one that they can realistically ban right now. I will say, though, that this is copium, because this card is like 10 years old and it has been broken in the past a lot, and they've never banned it. I just really hate this dynamic, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but like, the best deck in the format right now makes rank 4s and is also weak to Dweller because it's graveyard centered. And that means that Dweller is basically part of so many turn 1 boards right now, unless you have insane hand traps. And that means whenever I'm considering a deck in deck building and it has something to do with the graveyard, I just can't play it because I know that everyone is going to Dweller me with the meta deck, right? And so that means whenever a meta deck makes rank 4s, Dweller is always the first choice unless the meta is super not graveyard centered, which means that you can always forget every other graveyard deck, right? Every deck I'm looking at right now, and it's like, it has a couple graveyard effects. I'm like, yeah, well, I can't play that because, like, people are just going to make blind Dweller. Like, basically, my take is that Dweller is fine as long as people don't make blind Dweller, because then I can still play my graveyard deck, because if they don't know what I'm playing, they're not going to make Dweller. The problem is, if the best deck in the format is weak to Dweller, then everyone makes Dweller, and then it kills every single deck that tries to use the graveyard, and it's just an auto-win card. It's on top of that, it's even like a floodgate. So I'm coping here, but I'm going to leave Dweller at banned. And then for the last good stuff cards, which we're going to talk about briefly, the Bystials. The Bystials are very strong. I think they do warrant to be on the ban list, especially Magnamute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw them here just the same as they did in the OCG, actually. And that is limiting Magnamute and leaving the other ones untouched. I think realistically, in the future, if we keep playing these, they could do more than this. They could even limit Druid Worm as well. I think they should not ban Magnamute, at least not now. I really think one Magnamute is cool for the decks that play the Lubellion, right? I'm a big fan of Lubellion as a card, or Bystials as a concept, in decks where there are not just hand traps, right? I'm really sad that I haven't actually gotten a chance to play something like Branded Bystial. That deck was so fun when I tested it the first time. It's just sad that it can't keep up with Ishizu tier. I would really like to have a chance to play with the Bystial archetype, like with the actual archetype, right? Like setting up my branded beast and my branded regained and drawing cards and grinding and stuff like that. And like playing a deck that actually has a good target for Bystial Soronier to send from the deck to the graveyard, right? That's what I want. So for now, just limit Magnamute because it's one of the strongest cards in the game right now, but leave the other ones alone. And with that, we have finished basically the meta decks and the non-engine cards. And I think that would already be a pretty good list with a hefty amount of changes, but I think we can all agree that most of these things are necessary. It is a huge list and we're not done yet, but I don't think anyone can look at this list and be like, yeah, a bunch of these changes are unnecessary. I think a lot of these are reasonable, if not all of them. However, I have one additional point to make, and that is that if we get a list that is somewhat like this, it would basically just teleport us back into the national format where we had a couple of really strong decks. Namely, Adventure Engine is still at full power, Despia is still at full power, Sword Soul is still at full power, and the Runic Engine is still at full power. And that's why I briefly wanted to touch these decks a little bit preemptively, because I feel like it'd be unreasonable to hit the meta decks relatively hard and then just leave these decks completely untouched. I personally love the idea of banning Griffin. I think the Adventure Engine is pretty cool. And they shouldn't hit Ride or Enchantress. They should just get rid of the Omni Negate, and that's that. That is my based take on that. You cannot convince me otherwise. I love the idea of banning Griffin and leaving everything else as it is. We even still have Illegal Knight. So if you want to set up like an interruption, you can do that, right? You can do that. The Adventure Engine still prints cards, still puts bodies on the field like crazy, still puts up Illegal Knight as a disruption. It's still a very good engine, but it doesn't have the Omni Negate to play through hand traps anymore. And that would be beautiful. That's all I have to say about the Adventure Engine. Despia. I don't know who nominated Branded Lost, but I'm going to leave that untouched. The OCG has hit Aluber and opening. I'm going to say it right off the bat. I don't understand why. Aluber is literally Stratos. I think we are way past the point where a card like Aluber, a card like Stratos, is considered broken. Like, there's no way. Aluber is fair. The same goes for Branded Opening. Branded Opening is a good card, but it locks you into fusions, and it's like a teleport for your once per turn Stratos in defense position. Bro, that card is fine. I don't agree with hitting the consistency in Branded at all. The Alubrand, the Opening are just consistency cards. They are not too powerful. The only thing that it achieves is like make the deck less consistent. So I don't like that at all. The one card that they should absolutely hit is Branded Fusion. There's an argument for Branded Fusion to be banned, but I actually really like limiting it because I don't think it's warranted to ban the card right off the bat. Like the card is strong, but the deck is not so powerful that you have to ban Branded Fusion. I also just feel like I like the deck too much, and a lot of other people like the deck too much for warranting a Branded Fusion ban. And with one Branded Fusion, it opens up a lot of like cool interactions where the deck has great ways to recycle, right? You can add it back from the graveyard with Branded Retribution. You can set it back from the graveyard with Despian Tragedy. It hurts your consistency a little bit, but you have ways to deal with that. It's quite cool. The only other idea that I've heard that comes close to how much I like limiting Branded Fusion is banning Mirror Jade. I don't have Mirror Jade here because no one nominated, but I think limiting Mirror Jade would also be okay, because that's by far the best fusion monster that they make. You could also do something like limiting Albion, like the fusion monster, right? To hurt the grind game instead of the consistency. You could also do something weird like banning Branded in red, which is interesting technically because that makes the deck a lot weaker. I don't think it's going to happen though. I think Branded Fusion is the most obvious choice for a ban list, and I can agree with that. Sword Soul. People nominated Longyan, Emergence, and Moyi. I have a hard time hitting Sword Soul because, like I said, I don't like consistency hits. Personally, even, yeah, I'd be down limiting any of them, like one of them. Just like Emergence. Okay, like I could live with that. Arguably, the deck doesn't even need a hit. Maybe you also limit Longyan. Maybe. I wouldn't mind it. I'm kind of indifferent on Sword Soul. The one thing I don't like about Sword Soul is how like it tends to build itself. That's like the one annoying thing to me. It's like it's a very streamlined deck, both in building and in playing. It has a couple of cool lines, but yeah, it's fine. And then Runic, my dear. I'm gonna be clear. Runic very likely won't really see a hit. Personally, I don't expect to see a Runic hit. I'm still going to suggest a Runic hit because I know from personal experience how strong Runic can be, especially once the Ishizu problem is solved. Once the Ishizu problem is solved, the Runic stuff can still be very, very strong. Now, I don't know exactly what you would do. I would not hit Flashing Fire or Curse. Hugin, I would also not hit. For me, it's between Fountain and Tip. I think limiting one of these two would be reasonable. Not both, that'd be too much. So they both have pros and cons. Limiting Fountain basically makes it so that you can definitely still use Runic as a splashable engine. I think the pure Runic deck would be a little bit too vulnerable if you only have one Fountain. It'd be super vulnerable to like Cosmic Cyclone, right? Like one Cosmic, the game is over. So maybe that's cool. Like if you want the deck to still be like a good engine in some decks, but do you want to get rid of the pure Runic stun deck, then it would be good to limit Fountain. Limiting Tip is not as big of a deal for the stun deck, but rather for the decks that splash the engine, right? Like in those decks, Tip is much stronger. Tip is like good in all the decks, all the Runic decks, but basically the stun deck would rather have 1 Tip, 3 Fountain, and all the other decks would rather have 3 Tip, 1 Fountain. And this is why I'm going to leave it this way around. I personally would much rather hit the stun deck harder than the decks that splash the engine. That's why I like 1 Fountain. And then last but not least, I decided to basically, as you noticed, we didn't talk about any cards that are currently banned, and we didn't talk about many cards that could move up the ban list, simply because I felt like that was going to take too long. This was already a very long discussion, but I hope you still enjoyed it. I made one exception for my boy Ronin, though. This is first... Look, Konami, if you're watching, he's done nothing wrong, man. He's done nothing wrong, man. Give me back my Ronin Totem, please. Please, I don't want any other unbans. Leave everything banned. Keep your Harp Horror, I don't care, but give me back my Ronin. Return the Ronin Totem. Please, hand it over, give it to me. I'm begging you. And now, honestly, this is less hits than I expected to have on this list after we're finished. Now, chat, scale 1 to 10. How good is this ban list? Tier still dominates? Honestly, I think this list is a good balance between what's realistic and what's good. Do you know what I mean? Like, of course, I'm aware that you could make a better ban list, but I was trying to keep it at least somewhat realistic, right? Because yes, tier is still very good after this. If there's anything we have learned in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh is that you have to settle with compromises. You have to settle with compromises because they're not always doing exactly what you want them to do, right? And I think as a compromise, this list is pretty good. I'm actually surprised that you rated it kind of low because I saw mostly like 7s and 8s. I think it's a pretty... I'm pretty happy if they hit us with that list. Anyways, that is the full discussion. That is my take on the ban list. And I'm aware that people have different opinions. That is fine. Keep it civil. Both in the Twitch chat and in the YouTube comments. It is absolutely fine to disagree, to share your own takes, to have different views, because Yu-Gi-Oh as a game is being played by people with a lot of different perspectives, right? Like some people play the game in one way, some people enjoy the game in other ways. It is completely fine to disagree, just and it's completely fine to discuss in Twitch chat and in YouTube comments. So feel free to do that, but try to respect each other's opinions and try to, you know, keep it what's the word? Keep it nice. Man, I wish we get that ban list. I really would like that.